Through the floor plating of Sector 4, the atmospheric recycler hummed a wrong note. It wasn't the usual rattle of failing bearings, but a deep, subharmonic vibration that left the distinct, metallic taste of copper at the back of the throat. A biometric pulse. Kalen knelt in the maintenance crawl space, ignoring the hum as he worked a thumb over the torque spanner. His eyes remained fixed on the conduit above, yet his calloused fingers cleared the microgrit from the tool's ratcheting gear by feel alone. Beside his knee, a stress fracture in his heavy work boot rhythmically clicked against the deck with every shift of weight. Finished with the primary calibration, he wiped his hands. On the diagnostic terminal, a glowing lumina prompt awaited his sign-off. He pressed his thumb against the sensor, completing the Class D kinetic systems repair log. What he didn't read in the cascading alien syntax was the secondary protocol attached to that frequency. He had just formally claimed a royal bride. What happened next? I wish I could say the law protected us. Stay close. 3 hours later, a diplomatic envoy from the Lumina blocked the entrance to his cramped quarters. The translator, Cyrus Vane, stood rigid beside two towering guards whose skin pulsed with aggressive, bioluminescent gold. By the authority of the resonant reach, Cyrus stated, his voice tight with bureaucratic panic, Kalen was now legally bound to the third high scion. I signed for a leaky water recycler, Kalen said, grabbing his jacket off the bunk and checking his datapad for his next shift. You need to file a routing error with maintenance. The Lumina guards shifted, their light patterns flashing in horrified confusion at his casual dismissal of a sacred bond. From the corridor shadows emerged Lyra. Unlike her radiant kin, her skin absorbed the ambient light of the station, matte and completely devoid of the bioluminescent communication arrays that defined her species. Void silent. In a kingdom built of light, she was an absolute shadow. The envoy treated her silence as an invisible contagion, refusing to look directly at her darkened collarbone. They spoke around her, citing the impending threat from the Iron Hegemony, who viewed this accidental union as political sabotage. Kalen just watched Lyra. He noticed how her fingers subtly traced her robes, mapping her environment through tactile feedback exactly as he read his tools. She wasn't broken. For nights into the legal lockdown, they found themselves sitting on the cold floor of the transparent observatory dome. The galaxy spun below them, a dizzying swirl of stellar nurseries and trade routes. Kalen leaned against the glass. The rhythmic click of his fractured boot heel broke the oppressive quiet, a steady metronome that Lyra's head slowly turned toward. That cluster to the left, Kalen pointed, letting the vibration of his chest carry the words. It's called Blue. Outside the dome, Cyrus Vane recorded the interaction, his bioluminescence dimming in disgust. To the Lumina, describing the visual world to the Void Silent was an unforgivable mockery of her condition. They didn't understand that Kalen wasn't mocking her. He was actively rebuilding the universe so she could inhabit it. But the Iron Hegemony had already seen enough. 20 hours later, the summit convened in the Foundry Hub. Beneath the vaulted, iron-wrought ceiling, the Hegemony prosecutor formally filed the petition for asset classification. Kalen sat at the scarred defendant's table. He scraped a crescent of black grease from beneath his thumbnail. Beside him stood Commodore Halloway. The transport leaves in 10 minutes, the Commodore whispered, leaning heavy onto the table. If they strip your sovereignty, you become property, son. Mine for labor until your bones give out. Keeping his eyes on his hands, Kalen flicked the grease away. I have a diagnostic shift at 0800, he replied. Across the massive chamber, the Hegemony representative activated a holographic array. The third high scion emits no biometric data. The prosecutor boomed, the translation matrix struggling with his guttural dialect. Without light, there is no consciousness. Without consciousness, there is no personhood. The marriage contract, they argued, was merely a mechanical glitch. Past the glowing holograms, Kalen found Lyra. She sat utterly alone on the elevated royal dais. Slowly, her slender index finger drifted upward, tracing the cold, unlit contour of her own collarbone. That small, isolating movement carried the brutal weight of an entire species erasure. If Kalen boarded that evacuation transport, she would officially cease to exist. Pushing back his heavy iron chair, the mechanic stood up. The prepared legal files on his datapad he ignored entirely. Instead, he engaged the chamber's central acoustic dampeners. A suffocating silence fell over the gathered factions. "You measure life through non-linear refraction," Kalen said, his unamplified voice echoing against the bulkheads. "If the light doesn't bounce back the exact way your biology expects, you assume the room is empty." Toward the center of the floor, he slowly walked. But a living system isn't just optics. It's kinetic resonance. Holding up his calloused hands, he spread his fingers. "When a primary gear is stripped, I don't need to see it to know it's broken. I feel the drag. I feel the subtle shift in the mechanism." He turned toward Lyra. She is an empty space. She exerts undeniable gravity. From the shadows of the dais, Lyra stood. Cyrus Vane gripped his podium in sheer terror as her hands began a series of sharp, rhythmic strikes against the resonant metal of the railing. With bioluminescence, she was not speaking. The station's architecture became her voice. "The human." "He did not mock my silence," Cyrus translated, his own light patterns flickering wildly as his rigid worldview completely fractured. "He translated the stars into pressure and temperature. Through him, I perceived the expanse." The stillness that followed her testimony was absolute. No further legal arguments were entered into the central record. By a stunned, unanimous decree of the Hive Synod and the Lumina Court, the Hegemony's petition was dismissed. Into the permanent, unalterable legal manifest of the resonant reach, the system's technician was reclassified. Sovereign anchor. They returned to the quiet isolation of the observatory dome. The vast galaxy spun below them. Beside the transparent glass, Lyra wore the heavy ceremonial crown of the High Scion. The dark metal remained completely unlit against her matte skin. Kalen sat on the chilled deck plates beside her, resting his arms on his knees. Every few seconds, the stress fracture in his heavy boot clicked against the floor. She leaned her shoulder precisely toward the sound.